Lesson 2. Leadership. To lead suggests that you must have followers. For others to follow you, you must be superior to them in the things that they must follow you for. You must have superior ability in the particular. You must always be ahead by way of knowledge of all those you lead. The moment you fall down from the position of superior ability, you will automatically fail to lead, and you will have to follow others. Therefore, you must be ever vigilant in keeping ahead of those who lead by getting the latest and most correct information for which they are searching, because for it they are following you. People only respect leaders and follow them when there is something superior in them. A leader must have personality. He must be clean-cut in his appearance so as not to be criticized. An untidy leader is always a failure. He must be neatly dressed, and his general appearance must be clean and presentable, because people are supposed to follow him in his manner, behavior, and his general conduct. A leader's hair should always be well kept. His teeth must also be in perfect order, for people will criticize him for his unkempt hair and his bad teeth. Your shoes and other garments must also be clean. If you look ragged, people will not trust you. They will critically say he has no clothing. His shoes are very poor, and it is logical that whatever money he gets holds of he will use it on himself rather than for the purpose for which he makes his appeal. Never show your personal poverty to those you lead. They will never trust you. This does not mean that you should not reveal the poverty of the cause you represent, because that in your own mind work unceasingly towards it. The particular thing that you may want should be before you all the time, and whatsoever it takes to get it or make it possible should be undertaken. Use your faculties and persuasion to achieve all you set your mind on. Try never to repeat yourself in any one discourse and saying the same thing over and over again, except you are making new points, because repetition is tiresome and it annoys those who hear the repetition. Therefore, try to possess as much universal knowledge as possible through reading, so as to be able to be free of repetition in trying to drive home a point. No one is ever too old to learn. Therefore, you should take advantage of every educational facility. If you should hear of a great man or woman who is to lecture or speak in your town on any given subject, and the person is an authority on the subject, always make time to go and hear him. This is what is meant by learning from others. You should learn the two sides to every story, so as to be able to properly debate a question and hold your ground with the side that you support. If you only know one side of a story, you cannot argue intelligently nor effectively. As for instance, to combat communism, you must know about it, otherwise people will take advantage of you and win a victory over your ignorance. Anything that you are going to challenge, you must first know about it, so as to be able to defeat it. The moment you are ignorant about anything, the person who has the intelligence of that thing will defeat you. Therefore, get knowledge, get it quickly, get it studiously, but get it anyway. Knowledge is power. When you know a thing and can hold your ground on that thing and win over your opponents on that thing, those who hear you learn to have confidence in you and will trust your ability. Never, therefore, attempt anything without being able to protect yourself on it. For every time you are defeated, it takes away from your prestige, and you are not as respected as before. All the knowledge you want is in this world, and all that you have to do is to go seeking it and never stop until you have found it. You can find knowledge, or the information about it, in the public libraries. If it is not on your own bookshelf, try to have a book and own it on every bit of knowledge you want. You may generally get these books at second-hand bookstores for something 1/5 of the original value. Always have a well-equipped shelf of books. Nearly all information about mankind is to be found in the Encyclopedia Britannica. This is an expensive set of books, but try to get them. Buy a complete edition for yourself, and keep it at your home, and whenever you are in doubt about anything, go to it, and you will find it there. The value of knowledge is to use it. It is not humanly possible that a person can retain all knowledge of the world. But if a person knows how to search for all the knowledge of the world, he will find it when he wants it. A doctor or a lawyer, although he passed his examination in college, does not know all the laws and does not know all the techniques of medicine, but he has the fundamental knowledge. When he wants a particular kind of knowledge, he goes to the medical books or law books and refers to the particular law or how to use the recipe of medicine. You must, therefore, know where to find your facts and use them as you want them. No one will know where you get them, but you will have the facts, and by using the facts correctly, they will think you a wonderful person, a great genius, and a trusted leader. In reading, it is not necessary or compulsory that you agree with everything you read. You must always use or apply your own reasoning to what you have read based upon what you already know as touching the facts on what you have read. Pass judgment on what you read based upon these facts. When I say facts, I mean things that cannot be disputed. You may read thoughts that are old and opinions that are old and have changed since they were written. You must always search to find out the latest facts on that particular subject, and only when these facts are consistently maintained in what you read should you agree with them. Otherwise,
Hello, Aquaba. Welcome. Happy day to you, whichever day it is that you are able to review this program. And welcome to this week's episode of Our Ancestors' Voices, a weekly program sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. We are honored and happy that you have decided to join us for this very important episode today. 66 years of the Cuban Revolution. On January 1st, 2025, we will be commemorating 66 years of the Cuban Revolution, which was declared on January 1st, 1959. And today's program, we've done, as you know, if you followed us, we've done many programs on the Cuban Revolution, and we will continue to do that. But today's program is going to focus specifically on the U.S. imposed economic blockade against Cuba, which has been in effect since 1962. So for 95 years of the Cuban Revolution's existence, they have been devastated by this economic blockade, which prevents them from getting the resources they need to be able to properly build their revolution. So we're going to be talking about that today. There have been delegations to Cuba. There are mass protests happening throughout the country of Cuba today and all over the world, actually, calling for an end to the U.S. economic blockade against Cuba. There have been delegations to Cuba, marches of hundreds of thousands of people in the streets of Havana and around the Cuban country. The All African People's Revolutionary Party participated in the most recent delegation to Cuba, where we had a number of our organizers there to show our support for the Cuban Revolution. So we're glad that you're able to join us today, because I know that, especially if you live in the United States, what I just said, you probably know nothing about unless you've sought it out on your own accord. There's nothing in news media here about it, and there never will be, because they you to see anything constructive and productive coming out of a socialist revolution. That's the last thing on earth that people here that are in power want. So you're not going to know anything about it. So thank you for tuning in here, so you can at least get some information that can hopefully inspire you to want to know more. And we are, of course, honoring the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. They're the caretakers of this land, and they are gracious enough to permit us to continue to exist here. But while that's happening, they are continuing their fight for their forward liberation. And that fight is really about land reclamation. It's really about them getting the lands back that were stolen from them. And I know that for a lot of people here in this backward country, that's so difficult for people to imagine that ever happening. But we operate under the philosophy displayed by Huey P. Newton, the co-founder of the Black Panther Party, when he said, the man's technology will never equal the spirit of the people. The man's technology will never equal the spirit of the people. I will believe that until I take my last breath. And for that, we have hope and respect for the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. And we do believe that they will see a day where they will get these lands back. And we, of course, pay homage and respect to our African ancestors, who are the reason that we're here. As it relates to the Cuban Revolution, I think of a number of Africans who helped play significant roles in that revolution. People that, again, people in the U.S., for the most part, would have no knowledge of. Comrade Juan Almeida, who was there in the very beginning, was one of the 11 people who survived the sinking of the Grandma ship that sunk in the Caribbean Sea. That the 11 of them, Fidel Castro, Raul Castro, Che Guevara, Camille Cienfuegos, Juan Almeida, and a few other people went up into the Sierra Maestra Mountains there in Santiago de Cuba and began the guerrilla war that led to, along with the urban network that they had in place at the same time, the victory for the Cuban Revolution in January of 1959. Also, Harry Pombo Villegas, who was of course, one of the combatants in the Cuban Revolution, went to Bolivia with Che Guevara, was one of the 3 people to escape Bolivia after Che was assassinated there. And then Harry Pombo Villegas went on to fight for revolutionary cause. He actually went to the Congo, before Bolivia. He went there with Che and others, and then went to Bolivia, and then fought in Angola to run the racist apartheid mercenaries out of Southern Africa. So I had the opportunity to meet Brother Pombo, who is no longer physically with us, when I went to Cuba many years ago. Wonderful African comrade and brother, and a great inspiration to my life. So we're honoring our African ancestors, as we always do. And then we just give our basic introductions. For those that may not know who we are, our Ancestors' Voices is sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, as we said, the AAPRP. And the APRP is a revolutionary, independent, mass, pan-African political party with its base in Africa. We're not based in the U.S. We're not based in New York or Los Angeles or San Francisco or Chicago. Our base is the national home for African people all over the planet Earth. And that is Africa. No question about that. Someone asked me earlier today, well, how do you know we're African? I'm like, that's not debatable. I'm not going to debate that. I mean, if you don't know, you need to do your homework. I'm not going to sit here and debate that. That's like asking me, how do I know the sky is blue? If you don't know that, you got work to do. We have to, at some point, take the discussion to a higher level. It's too late in the game to feed into people's intellectual laziness that way. So we know that Africa is our national home. And that's why we fight for Pan-Africanism, which we define correctly as the total liberation and unification of Africa under scientific socialism, one continental socialist government. That's what we're fighting for. We don't care if you think it's possible or not. That's as irrelevant to me as what I'm talking about is relevant to you if you don't believe it. We are going to achieve Pan-Africanism. And our work to achieve Pan-Africanism is outlined in Kwame Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, the cover of which is displayed on your screen right now. And in that book, Nkrumah outlines the strategy, which calls for uniting all of the revolutionary Pan-African formations on the ground in Africa who agree with the objective of Pan-Africanism being one unified socialist Africa. And we have to say that because a lot of people have a lot of definitions of Pan-Africanism. And we're saying clearly that there's one definition. It's one unified socialist Africa. It's not just black people getting along. It's not just black people traveling to Africa. That's not Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism is an objective. It's a political objective. And it's the total liberation and unification of Africa under one continental socialist government. That's what it is. And our Ancestors' Voices, this program here is sponsored each week, again, by APRP through us, organizers in the APRP, myself, Ajamu, and my biological and ideological daughter, Shakura. So to get us started on today's episode, 66 Years of the Cuban Revolution, I'll turn it over to Shakura.
Thank you. Greetings, everyone. How are we doing? Are we ready to talk about Cuba? I am so excited. This is literally my favorite topic of all times. So I just think that it's important for us to start off with really kind of breaking down what the past has represented for our comrades in Cuba. So, like we were hearing from the podcast earlier, again, I was playing clips from A Message for the People, a book written by Marcus Garvey, and he was talking about the importance of increasing your political education. So, what better way for us to continue to learn more about how the story of the Cuban Revolution has begun to unfold, right? And so thankfully, we just finished a book in my work study circle, Women in the Cuban Revolution, written by Fidel Castro and Vilma Espin. And it's been such a joy. It's been a pure pleasure to read that book. I have had so much refreshing ideas of what humanity, what egalitarianism looks like, and what it means to be principled, to be dedicated, to be devoted, and more importantly, to see the ultimate value of using socialism really as a bridge to lead to communism. And we've talked before about how you might want to, eradicate a capitalist system. And the bridge of that, the transition would be moving into socialism. That way you can still work on eradicating class division, which is the very definition of what a communist system looks like, meaning there is none. There is no class division under communism. And so this is why we always say Cuba is a great example of showing us what socialist Cuba looks like. And we can continue to look at them for examples as we continue to fight for the next stage of communism, where we hope that there will be no class divide at all anywhere. That would be ideal, because if there was no class divide, people everywhere wouldn't have to justify why they are valued based on how much money they make and based on the value associated with them, but instead they would be based on their contributions. They would be based on their ideologies. They would be based on how they are collectively making decisions to help make the community, the neighborhood, the world, the planet a better place, right? So looking at this background for Cuba, we can start with thinking about how in 1953, the July 26th movement led by Fidel Castro led the attack against the Moncada garrison in Santiago de Cuba. And then we can move forward maybe 5 years into the future. In 1958, the Grandma ship sunk, and 11 of those combatants were able to survive, which means they were able to start the guerrilla war from the mountains above Santiago. I was able to read from the book I just mentioned to you that Fidel actually helped to fight against a puppet, for lack of a better term, Fulgencio Batista. And so because of that, that's what led into the 1958 Grandma ship being sunk. It was a yacht that they took. And what happened was the US regime exiled Fidel to Mexico. They told him he couldn't be in Cuba anymore. And they were able to sail back to Cuba on the Grandma yacht, which allowed them to defeat the Batista's regime. And so this took place on January 1st, 1959, as Comrade Ajamu mentioned. And I think it's important to kind of think back to what was happening that kind of led to the embargo, right? The embargo. And so we can even think about how, unfortunately, Cuba has been under attack where they have needed to defend themselves multiple times throughout history, herstory, their story. We can think about the very first war that they conducted that was against the Spanish people. And that they were fighting because Spain was trying to take dominion over Cuba. And they called it the 10 Years' War because it lasted roughly that, ending in 1868. And then they would come back to fight for a second war where they were fighting for their independence as Cubans in 1895, which is where the US entered. And before Cuba could finish their initial fight with Spain, they were able to establish occupation. The US was able to establish occupation within an army on Cuban soil. So you can kind of think about how the US has always kind of had their eyes on Cuba. And I think, as we continue to think more about this, whether it was supporting the urban strikes and the shutdowns organized by a network led by Vilma Espen and others, the revolution overthrew the US backed Batista regime. And that's, of course, on January 1st. And I think another piece to consider is the US has always understood how valuable and beneficial it would be to be able to control the resources that are coming out of Cuba. They don't want to encourage socialism because that would be too much like admitting that capitalism is, in fact, a terrible system that should not be supported. And, excuse me, that would simply never happen. But that doesn't mean that they don't see the value of socialism, right? Because the thing about being an oppressor is you have to know your enemy so well that you know them better than they know themselves if you truly want to oppress successfully. And so I think with the US, because they were very interested, as I just mentioned, in keeping their military establishment on Cuban soil. They were also interested, because of course that was another way they could keep tabs on what was happening, but they were also interested in studying the socialist revolution from its start to ending. And they saw what kind of things were taking place on Cuban soil that were eradicating poverty, that were eradicating illiteracy, that were eradicating sexism, disrespect, inhumanity. I remember the book talking about how they made it very clear within the first initial months of the revolution that they acknowledged that non-male people had serious, serious challenges because they were faced with needing to hold three positions. They had the triple burden, they called it, where they needed to be responsible for the job. They needed to also be responsible for housework, and they had political activities that they needed to participate in. And it was very difficult for non-male Cuban people to hold all three of those positions and still be able to still be able to survive, still be able to exist, still be able to have the means that they needed to carry themselves. That was one point that Fidel and Vilma made in the book. They also argued that for a lot of non-male people, they had complete dependence on their partners because they themselves were not educated. And we all know that if you don't have the ability to read, if you don't have the ability to write, it can make your life extremely crippling and difficult because that means that you don't have agency to make your own decisions. That means that you don't have resources coming in, you don't have income, you don't have finances, so you don't have decisions that you can make. You don't have options. You don't have any of that. You just have to be provided for. And that means you have to tolerate nonsense behavior, like partners that are not being faithful to you, partners who won't allow you to divorce if you want to, partners who won't allow you to decide how the children are being raised. Your voice is insignificant. Your voice does not matter because the theory behind it is you're not contributing to the family financially, and your housework is not being respected, so you're not contributing socially, if that makes sense, and therefore your voice is invalid. And so one of the first things that they did with the Cuban Revolution is they started traveling all over the countryside and offering classes teaching these people how to read and write, because they understood that if we really want to achieve a beautiful revolution, we need to empower everyone, not just males. We need to empower non-males so that they can make their own decisions, so that they can have ideologically, physical, financial, social, emotional, mental freedom to do whatever the heck they want to do, so that they can contribute to this country, building a collective economic system that works for them as well as everyone else. Not just putting money back in the male identifying pockets, but to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to live in a world where they want to be happy and where they can function, where they want to be free to be able to abort if that's what they want to do. You know, abortions are free in Cuba. That was another fight that they did. Contraceptives are free in Cuba. There's no issue about sexual assault or rape. The US has some of the worst rates when it comes to that, but that's not an issue in Cuba because people understand what it means to get the kind of help that they need. Psychological services, counseling, all of that is free, you all. And so if you have some type of needs, you can go get the help you need so that you're not interested in seeking ways to harm other people. One of my favorite components that I took from the book is that they made it so that they didn't have to worry about pornography sexualizing non-male people, which would also give permission to the exploitation of the body, as well as enforcing sexism and enforcing patriarchy. And the way they did that was they associated that sexualization, exploitation, that's connected to capitalism. Well, Cuba is not a capitalist country. So therefore, we don't need half-naked non-male people to be standing on cars if we want to sell some cars. We don't need non-male people to be half naked standing by a pool if we want to sell this pool. We can find other ways to make these products be appeasing, to be affordable, and to make people want to buy them without the association of exploitation of bodies. I mean, I think that is brilliant. And then you might ask yourself, well, if the intention was to educate all these people, what was the purpose of that? Well, the purpose was they wanted more non-male people to start working. They wanted more people to start working and contributing again to the economic system, because more money being put in the system was a benefit for all people to live in a better world. If the system and the economic financial stability is flowing, then that allows them to be able to do the things they need to do. This is partly why they have been so successful, even with the embark, where they've still been able to do the things they needed. Now, I'm sure Comrade Ajamu, or even myself, as we advance to the next slide, we'll talk in a moment about some of the serious challenges that they have faced because of the US sabotage. Don't get us wrong. But by the same token, Cuba is resistant and they are resilient beyond measure. You must understand that. So even though the US has stopped them from being able to afford cement, for example, they need cement because there are more and more people in need of building daycares, more and more people in need of building cafeterias, more and more people in need of building laundromats. There was a time where not everyone had in-house appliances. And one of the biggest contradictions that non-male people expressed was, you want me to go to work and work full time and contribute to this economic system, but I need to be able to wash my clothes for my family. I need to be able to cook for my family, or I need my partner to do these things so that I could still function. We can have clean clothes, we can have food on the table, which means it would be easier if I had in-house appliances to do these things. If not, we need to build more laundromats so that I can go quickly to this next block, wash my clothes, dry them, and be able to fold them and bring them back to my families. Well, all of these resources cost money and they cost cement to be built. And the US found a way to block Cubans from getting the cement that they needed. They found other ways around that, though. They found other ways around that because, again, they didn't want to stop the progression that they were making. They didn't want to stop the ability for this to continue to grow and for more people to have opportunities to continue to contribute overall. So it wasn't just the fact that they were finding ways to build cafeterias, they were finding ways to build daycares. They were making sure that everything that they had at their advantage, they were trying to figure out how to use it to contribute to the overall maintenance of the socialist Cuban Revolution. And it was other situations, like they had a shopping bag program where for non-male people who are working class, all they had to do was drop off their list at the grocery store in the morning. They would go to work, they would come back. All the groceries had been selectively picked out for them and put in their bag. They paid their money, and then they're able to get to their house. How many of us stress like crazy trying to get off work so that we can run to the grocery store before it closed and make sure that dinner is on the table by 6 because little Johnny has to eat and do their schoolwork before they go to sleep. But you also got to put them in the bath and you got to make sure they get to sleep and get enough hours so that they can be ready and alert for school the next day. Well, Cubans understood that that's a lot that's being asked of one person. So they made it easier by basically introducing Instacart, only it was in the 1960s, so that people could do the pre-shopping for them. And what is that doing? That's fueling the economy as well, because the grocery stores still need to make money. It was the same thing with hair salons. What they found was that non-male people wanted to fuel the economy by getting their hair done, but the problem was the hair salons were closing at 5. Working class people get off at 6. So they're like, I can't get my hair done. What's up with that? So hair salons said, all right, we will stay open 2 extra hours later so that folks who are coming off of work can still work a full day shift. They can come get their hair done. We can make money. They can be happy with their hairstyle, and we all can continue to flourish. And so my point is, the Cuban Revolution is nothing to play with. That's my point. And if you don't know anything about it, I strongly suggest you do your research, because to imagine a world where people are able to be supported to do the things that they need to do, all because everybody has the intention of putting that money back into the economy, I can't imagine anything more beautiful than that. Everybody understands what the socialist revolution means to them, but they also understand what it means to the whole countryside. They understand what it means to the whole world, because they don't want to just provide free education, excuse me, to Cubans. I can go to Cuba right now and get a medical degree if I want to. And they don't care, because they want me to take that information and then take it back to wherever I came from and make the world a better place. Help other people the way that I was able to be helped. So I think that these are things that we need to just keep thinking about, you all, especially as we think about how these are all reasons that the US wanted to shut them down. We can even acknowledge that there's so much sabotage to mention. We'd be here all night if we talked about all the different examples. But we can start with the 1961 US military invasion in Playa de Giron, which is also known as the Bay of Pigs, the 1962 economic embargo against Cuba, which we are clearly talking about today. And then we can also even think about the continued efforts to illegally overthrow the Cuban government, which included over 600 confirmed attempts to kill Fidel Castro. I remember thinking about that, and I wrote down in my notes, the US wanted Castro dead because he helped achieve the Cuban independence, and he was able to defeat the puppet Fulgencio Batista that I spoke to you about before. And so just as we continue to think about this, we can think about how there were so many beautiful things. Like, even if you think about the makeup of the militants who came together to build the actual military of the Cuban Revolution, these were peasants, you all. These were workers. These were working class people, and these were peasants who came together to fight for Cuba's revolution and independence. They understood what was at stake, and they also understood that they didn't want to lose what they had gained. They didn't want to lose the life that they had. So it's important for you to not be confused when people misspeak about Cuba. You have a responsibility to protect them. Had it not been for Cuba, you wouldn't even have half the public health resources that you have today. We didn't even know about being able to safely get some type of antiviral treatment until it was Cuba that came out with it, which came out with it before Pfizer released their first pilot vaccine for the COVID-19 virus. Now, you've already heard us talk about HIV eradication. You've heard us talk about cervical cancer eradication. You've heard us talk about syphilis eradication. So I'm trying to give you some new facts tonight because I am clearly very excited about all the health accomplishments that they have made. But our point is you need to protect what the Cuban Revolution has done because they have worked so hard for even you to benefit, even if you don't live in Cuba. This is very important for us to think about. And we can also think about how, this was this piece where there was so much going on. We even made it clear that there was a piece where they wanted to make sure that they called them the micro brigades. And these were builders that Cuban, governments had hired to maybe build these buildings as they needed to be built. So when they saw a need for a new shopping center, they hired these micro brigades people. Hired may not be the right word, but they were able to work with them to get them the supplies that they needed to hire the new shopping center, to build the new shopping center. If there was more of a demand for a new park, these micro brigades would build this new park. If there was a demand for a new house, they would build these new housing complexes so that they could eradicate unhoused people being on the streets. So this is why the US tried to kill Fidel over 600 times, because you just can't do all of this and have the US blocking your resources for over 60 years and be that successful. You're just making the US look like the fool that it is. And that's just simply not okay. So this is why they tried and, would continue to try and, probably had something to do with Vilma Espin and other folks that were fighting the cause, right? And so as I prepare to pass it back to Comrade Ajamu, we have a responsibility, you all. This is about to be a brand new time frame. If you understand, how the clock is moving in terms of the new year coming up, we have every responsibility to be as open about the possibilities of how beautiful the idea of socialism can be. And just thinking more about that, we can continue to think about, again, how the Cuban Revolution has impacted Africans, how it has impacted colonized people, and also how we have a responsibility, even if we ourselves don't want to go to Cuba, we have a responsibility to learn from what they have taught us so that we can still work on making this world better. You may not want to admit publicly that you believe in socialism, but you can't argue that by the time this seminar is done, socialism is not a good system for humanity everywhere. Ashay.
Obrigada, Asante Sana. Thank you, Shakura. And I just want to give you a moment of praise, just to say that, I think what you just did was demonstrate what we're always talking about when we talk about the positive impacts political education, being involved in a consistent political education program will bring. And by that, we don't mean just you reading a book here and there individually. We mean participating in a process where you engage with other people and you share your study processes with people, the same people on a consistent basis. That's what we do in the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And what you just displayed and what you were talking about is an example of how your consciousness around the Cuban Revolution has grown, not because somebody told you something, not because somebody you knew that was in Cuba, born there, and doesn't know anything about Cuba, told you something, or you saw somebody say something on TV or nonsense like that, but because you engage in a process to study, and it comes across when you're talking about it because you understand all the variables about what they're doing there. And that's why we always say we need so much more of that. We have to have that political education. We don't have that in the world, and we certainly don't have it more so, we have it less so here in the United States than everywhere. So this is why we hope that you can be inspired by this to want to know something about some of these things, like the 62 years of the economic strangulation of Cuba. And I'll say that, just according to the United Nations, and we're not fans of the United Nations, the United Nations is an imperialist dominated organization. These organizations are funded, right? The United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, And guess who's at the top of the list for financing these organizations? It's the international capitalist countries, the United States of America, Germany, Britain, France, Belgium, Australia, Canada, the Zionist state of Israel. These are the people that fund these organizations. So these organizations are not objective. Their primary focus is on maintaining and continuing to develop the capitalist system. So we're not fans of them, but the situation is so irrefutable that we can use their statistics to make the points that we want to make. But before I do that, I just want to give another example. There was just a comment that was made from something Shakur said. Someone said, "Well, what are the examples of how Cuba has helped us?" Talking about African people in the U.S. And again, I'm going to respond to that the same way I mentioned in the beginning of this show. It's 2025, damn near. If you don't know what Cuba has done to help African people all over the world, you should be ashamed of yourself. You should want to do some work so you don't sound so silly. I mean, that's insanity that we don't know this. And it's not a problem that we don't know, because all of us don't know something, but to be arrogant about it, like I have to give you an explanation. I'm not giving you a damn thing. Do your own research. I mean, if you don't understand by now that Cuba has, as Shakur has mentioned, we've had numerous programs about this, and you can't even click twice to get the programs you're just not serious. So why should I waste my time explaining it? You don't know anything about the 35 countries in Africa that Cuba supplied anti-COVID, antiviral medications for COVID, and then vaccinations once they developed that, free of charge. You don't know about the thousands of African people all over the world who, as Shakur mentioned, have been able to get medical degrees and just ace the board exams here in this country, by the way. You don't know about that. You don't know about the fact that Cuba has given asylum to so many African freedom fighters, including many from the United States of America, from Robert Williams to Huey P. Newton to Assata Shakur today, to many others that are in Cuba today, because of Cuba's willingness to take them in when they weren't safe anywhere else in the world. If you don't know about Cuba sending 500,000 troops to Southern Africa to stop Southern Africa from becoming racist apartheid, you got work to do. Don't come in here at us like we got to prove something to you. It's already proven. It's like the sky is blue and you like, prove it to me. I don't have to do that. You got to stop being so in love with being so dumb and find out something. So according to the United Nations, and there are many other sources, right? Cuba has lost literally trillions of dollars from its national economy from the 62 years of the U.S.-led economic embargo against them. So if you look at economies, there is not an economy on earth that could lose trillions of dollars over a 62-year period and not be significantly devastated as a result of that. And not only has Cuba been able to maintain itself despite that, but they've actually, as we've mentioned many times and will continue to mention, made great strides in the process. But hold on to that for a minute. Lost trillions of dollars. In 2023 alone, they lost $5 billion in annual revenues. This is a poor Caribbean country. There is not a single country in the Caribbean. You can name whichever one you want. Jamaica, Haiti, the Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, the Virgin Islands. Not one of those countries could afford to lose $5 billion in 1 year out of their annual revenues and not have operations in their country significantly impacted by that. But yet Cuba was able to do it last year and still maintain the quality health care that they have, still ensure that there's no houselessness in the country, still be able to make sure people have food to eat. There's no starvation in that country, still have education be free, still have health care be free. I mean, this is phenomenal that they've been able to do that despite the blockade. And since 1962, things like spare parts. Now, Shakur talked about concrete. You have to think about it for a second. If you're like in our house, we had some dry rot issues in one of the bathrooms, and so we had to hire someone to come and do that. And Mike Epps had a comedy routine. We hired this African that did wonderful work, but Mike Epps had a comedy routine, and he's talking about don't hire no black people to do no work in your house, because the first thing they're gonna say is, I need $200 before I can do anything else. And it's funny because we understand capitalism, right? It's like I say that our people are the race because of the racism in the trades industries in this backward country. Our people aren't. It's very difficult for us to get in and get the backing, the apprenticeships, to get licensing and do all those things at the same level that the Europeans do. So a lot of us do the work, and we don't have all of those things, and we certainly don't have the resources. To facilitate that. We don't have that. So because we don't have it, we are in a position where we can't really do any work unless everything is fronted to us. And so although it's a joke, it's also the truth in a lot of ways. So imagine that for a second. Imagine that you had to get work done for your health in your house, but all the parts that were required, the sink, the plumbing parts, the paint, the materials to engage in the painting, these are the types of things that are not available to the Cuban people because of the economic embargo. The countries that produce those things are not permitted to trade with Cuba so that Cuba can have those things and utilize them the way we take for granted. And there have been no U.S. cars in Cuba since the blockade, but they have cars there from other countries. They have Korean cars, they have Chinese cars, they have some Japanese cars that they're able to get, and even some cars from Europe are able to come to Cuba, countries that are not honoring the U.S. economic blockade. Most countries do honor it, but there are a lot of countries that resist it and refuse to honor it. And even when they get those cars, when the cars break down, you all know, just since the COVID pandemic, it takes a lot longer to do things now than it used to. Your car gets wrecked and you have to get it repaired. Something that used to take 4 or 5 days now takes 6, 7 weeks to get done. Why? Because of the lack of accessibility of parts and the ability to get those parts, and people working the shipyards to upload those parts, and all of those variables are impacted. Well, this is what you've experienced, just a little inconvenience since the pandemic. The Cuban people have been living with for 62 years because of this embargo. And unlike the pandemic, it's not something that's health-wise impacting millions of people, causing imbalances in the economic system. This is because a bully nation, the United States of America, is afraid for you all to see how successful they can be with their socialist revolution. And that's the reason why they sabotage them. And I don't care who you are. If you like, well, I don't believe in socialism, even though I've never read a single book about it. I don't know anything about it. I just don't believe in it because my slave master told me don't believe in it. If that's you, and that is a lot of us, then even if that is you, then the question you still have to ask yourself is, if socialism is so terrible, if it's such a bad system, if it's such a system that cannot function and you cannot gain anything for your people by utilizing a socialist system, why don't they leave it alone? Let it fail on its own. Why do they have to strangle the country economically? Just let it alone. Then you could say, look, those people had all the resources to develop under a socialist system and they couldn't do it. That's the question you got to ask. If it's such a guaranteed failure, why did they have to sabotage it? That's like somebody telling you saying, I want to go to college and get my degree, and someone saying, well, you're not going to be able to finish school. There's no way you're going to be able to do that. And then you start school, and everything they do, they sabotage your financial aid. They sabotage you being able to sign up for your classes. When you go to buy your books, they've sabotaged your debit card so you can't buy your books. And then all the time they keep saying, well, I told you they were going to struggle in college. Well, yeah, but what would they do if you didn't bother them and let them achieve it on their own and see what they could accomplish? This is what's happening with socialist Cuba. So they cannot get basic parts for household items, for items they need, AC parts, stove, refrigerator parts. Pharmaceuticals are not permitted via the U.S. economic embargo. So again, the next question you have to ask yourself, if they can't get pharmaceuticals, how the hell are they able, as Shakur said, to wipe out all of these diseases? And their biomedical system that they developed, because they had to have an alternative to the U.S. economic blockade, has permitted them to be able to create medicinal solutions to healthcare issues, because they don't have the pharmaceutical, they don't have the drugs. So that's what they have to do. And their biomedical uh, process in Cuba has been so successful that the capitalist countries, including the United States of America, is studying it as we speak. And if I was a Cuban, I'd say, to hell with you. I'm not telling you a damn thing. But that's, they're socialists. I'm a socialist too, but I'm not as developed as the Cuban revolutionaries. I would tell them, to hell with you. I ain't telling you nothing, but they don't function like that. They're trying to make a contribution to the world. So they allow these predators to come in and study their methods, even though we know these predators will leave there and they'll try to figure out a way to do the biomedical work while figuring out a way to profit off of it, which Cuba doesn't do. Healthcare is free in that country. Medical equipment, all of these things have been unavailable for Cuban consumption. Whether they had the ability to buy them on the economic market or not is irrelevant. They legally, based on U.S. law, not their law, could not purchase these things. And that's strangled the entire country. So how is Cuba fighting back? How are they fighting back against this? And if you see their pictures, these pictures are from last week. And as you can see, hundreds of thousands of people marching on the Malecón, led by Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel and legendary revolutionary Raul Castro, the younger brother of Fidel, led by them, marching on the street. And you can see their Cubans there, European Cubans, African Cubans, Cubans who look indigenous. They're all marching to call for an end to the U.S. economic blockade against Cuba. They have on Che Guevara shirts. They're waving Che Guevara flags. And I chose these pictures. You can double check it if you don't believe it. But I chose these pictures because clearly people who are against it, because a lot of times what the anti-Cuban revolution forces will do is they'll show a protest and they'll say that it's against the Cuban people, and they'll make sure that the pictures are actually people supporting the Cuban Revolution, but they'll make sure that the pictures don't show anything like the Che Guevara flag that's in the picture on the screen now, so that you don't know that. Or they'll say this is a demonstration in Cuba. They do this more often than anything else against the Cuban Revolution. And that demonstration will be taking place in Miami, Florida. And the reason why we know that is the last couple of years when they tried to say there was a major uprising in Cuba against the Cuban Revolution, they kept putting this picture out, all these people saying down with communism and all this stuff. But these people were so reactionary and stupid that they forgot to edit out the street sign in the back of the picture, which was clearly a major intersection in Miami, Florida. So, this is why the political education, you all, is so important. Because if you don't know about this stuff, whatever they put in front of you, you'll believe it. Because you have nothing else to give you any other perspective to fight it. So you'll believe it. Whatever anyone tells you, you'll believe it. Because you don't have anything else to help you understand it on a different level. So these demonstrations on Friday, December 20th, that's when they started taking place. Hundreds of thousands of people protesting in front of the U.S. Embassy in Havana, chanting, "We will never surrender." That's what they were chanting. They weren't chanting, "Hands up, don't shoot." They weren't chanting, "We shall overcome." They weren't chanting, "This land is our land." They were chanting, "We will never surrender." And in case you're a little slow with it, I'll help you understand what that means. What they're saying is that our socialist revolution is ours. We are not going to surrender to U.S. imperialism. That's what they're saying. And it doesn't take a genius to understand that, because all you got to do is look at the 66 years that they've had their revolution and study a little bit about it. And it becomes quite clear pretty fast that these people are dedicated to their revolution. About 75% of the people alive in Cuba today were born after 1959 or 1959 or after. So these are people that have never in their life experienced having to pay a medical bill. Healthcare has always been free for them. These are people that have never in their life had to pay to go to school. They don't have any student loan debt. That doesn't exist in socialist societies. They have never had that. So do you think that that's what they want? They want, you think, I mean, you want to, if you want to question whether people in Cuba support the Cuban Revolution, do you think that they want to have to go into bankruptcy because of debt to healthcare insurance companies? You think they want to owe $200,000 in student loan debt and cannot even get a job with it? You think that's what they want? I mean, that's if that's what you believe, you please go ahead and believe that, and God bless you. I mean, but clearly that's not what people anywhere who have any sense want. They want a society that takes care of them. They want to pay taxes and get something for it. They don't want to be like what happens here. So that's why they're chanting that. And it was the first time in over a decade that a protest had taken place like that in front of the U.S. Embassy, because there's consequences to protesting in front of U.S. embassies in other countries. I've done it. I know what the consequences are. There's consequences to doing that. You know, they have the power to create consequences for you. But the people of Cuba are fed up. And so this act, led again by, the president Miguel Diaz-Canel and Raul Castro, makes that approach it represents a change, them willing to challenge the U.S. Embassy, and they should. And we should be demonstrating in front of U.S. offices here against the Cuban embargo. And what it says that the Cuban Revolution is, they're willing to react a little differently with the criminal U.S. government. They've engaged in negotiations around eliminating this blockade for the entire 62 years of its existence. And I think now what this signals is that maybe they're going in a direction of appealing to the consciousness of people around the world instead of the morality of the U.S. government. Because we all know Kwame Ture told us about that. Morality is a great weapon to struggle with if your enemy has a conscience, and America has none. So that's not ever going to work against this backward empire. So, the reasons why imperialism refuses to stop, right? And, these signs, you see them all over Cuba, right? Cuba, yes. Yankees, no. And they're not talking about people in the U.S. know. That's not their message. They're not saying that because, if you travel to different countries and you talk to people, they already know you all ain't the ones making the decisions that come out of Washington, D.C. They know that. And they're not throwing shade against you. They just know how life functions in the U.S. They know everybody here is just basically concerned about their own individual life. And that's by design. Okay, that's how the system is set up to ensure that happens. And they know that. They know you don't know. And they see when you travel that you're trying to break that pattern. And so they want to give you as much information as they can. So they're not saying no to you. They're saying no to this government. But I do know that people ask constantly. They don't ask me when I travel because they know, based on the reason why I'm in the country that they live in, that I'm not down with none of this program. But they will ask me, why do people in the U.S. tolerate this? They will ask that. And I tell them all the time, that's a question I've been trying to answer my entire life. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know why people put up with what this government does. I don't know why people do that. I don't know why people are so intellectually dishonest that they don't want to take the time to find out the truth about these things. The U.S. economic embargo has been going on whether there was a Democratic regime in power or a Republican regime in power. It didn't matter. And don't talk to me about Obama and what he did, because the only reason why he negotiated with Cuba It wasn't in the headlines, you all. Like, you can go back and research it and find it for yourself. The files are there. Go back and they're in the Library of Congress. You can see them. I've gone and looked at them. One of the there were several main requirements that were made by the Obama administration against the Cuban Revolution to try to do work to lift the Cuban embargo. They weren't going to be able to lift the embargo because that would have to happen from a vote of Congress. And for the last several presidential regimes in this country, everything's been done by executive order. They can't get Congress to do anything. And that's not going to stop anytime soon, because now you got these clowns getting ready to go in. And they're clown. The ones in there right now are clowns. So that's not going to stop anytime soon. But for those of you that want to try to convince us that there's some kind of difference, some kind of meaningful difference between these two parties, the economic blockade has continued. And what they were demanding of Cuba to try to ease some of the pressure of the economic blockade, the economic blockade was never softened under the Obama administration. Don't believe that lie. All they did was they allowed people to travel there and a few other superficial things, but the economic blockade remained in place the entire time of the Obama administration. So I'm sorry, I'm not ready. I can't accept, well, he don't deserve nothing, especially since I know that based on these Library of Congress files I mentioned, that they one of the key negotiation things they wanted was they wanted Cuba to commit to doing to ceasing revolutionary activity in a variety of areas. There are too many to mention. And they also wanted Cuba to extradite Assata Shakur back to this country. And if you don't know who Assata Shakur is, hey, you got to go back and do the work. We got plenty of videos talking about her. But the Cuban government told him on all points, they told Obama that's non-negotiable. They used the line that Secretary used when Guinea gained its independence from France in 1958. They said, we prefer poverty, we prefer dignity and poverty to slavery and riches. So you keep your embargo there. We're not backing off of our principles. So from 1950s to today, the U.S. continues this attempt to destroy the Cuban Revolution, primarily because they just don't want people in the U.S. and other capitalist countries seeing all of the victories that socialist development brings to the world. You don't know any of the victories. You're not going to turn on CNN, CIA, Fox. None of those are going to talk about the medical victories that Cuba has achieved. None of them are going to tell you about, and again, I told you, United Nations is an imperialist organization, but none of them are going to tell you about the United Nations report that said that the Cuban schooling system is the strongest on the planet Earth, and that in 4 or 5 generations, they already wiped out illiteracy. Shakura told you that. Here in this country, illiteracy is still a problem, but they wiped that out in Cuba. Then 99% of people can read and write there. And they talked about in the report that in another 2 or 3 generations, they will have made unprecedented advancements against racism, against patriarchy, against homophobia, because they're teaching respect for people from colonized communities, for women, for marginalized gender people, for LGBTQ people. That's the curriculum in Cuban schools today. And Raul Castro and Vilma Espin's daughter, Marilena Castro, is the director of social services overseeing this entire process. So while people here are sitting there talking about, I don't want to go to the bathroom with a trans person, as if you've already been to the bathroom with a trans person multiple times, dumbass. But while that's the discourse in this backward ass country, in Cuba, they are engaging in quality education around different people that exist on the planet Earth. So that's why the United Nations is saying in just a couple of generations, they'll have made unprecedented advances in eradicating these backward ideas, whereas this country's going backward as it relates to those things. It's more racist now It's more patriarchal. It's more homophobic. Those things are increasing as if that was possible. I never would have thought it would be possible. But yet this is what's happening here because it's a backward cesspool empire. And the reason why is because it's built and maintained on capitalism, which will always prioritize profit over people. And the reason why Cuba's revolution is advancing despite all of these serious and devastating efforts to sabotage their revolution is because it's based on principles of socialism, where the role of society is to meet the needs of the masses of the people. And everybody should strive to be morally incented, not materially incented. And because of that, their revolution is going to win. They are not going to be able to defeat the Cuban Revolution. And there are many of us many of us working to ensure that people in the world understand what Cuba has done for all of humanity, while at the same time understanding what the United States, Britain, France, what they've done to steal, rob, and pilfer from the majority of humanity. Long live the Cuban Revolution. We salute and congratulate them for 66 years of standing up to the biggest bully in the history of human civilization. And just like anybody that recognizes they need to stand up against bullies, once you do that, victory is on the horizon. So we just want to thank you all for joining us today. We want to invite you back next week, Sunday, January 5th, where we will be talking about George Padmore's statement that he made almost 100 years ago. George Padmore was a revolutionary Pan-Africanist, and he said, revolutionary at 20, moderate at 30, conservative at 40, and reactionary at 50. We're going to be talking about why does that happen? All of us know somebody that is probably some of you that fit that. So we're going to be talking about why that happens. And we want to ask you to click on the QR code in the upper left-hand corner, the red and white one. You can get all of the programs that come out from the APRP. There are a number of them. This is just one of them. So click on that, as well as programs that we have, central programs that we sponsor, so you can learn about those as well. So please do that. Please go to our Forward Ever shop. I'll try to put my camera down. I have on a hoodie right now, a Malcolm X Pan-Africanist hoodie that I just got last week from our Forward Ever shop. So you should order. We have new materials in there. So order up. You know, you just spent money with all of these crooks and criminals last week. Those of you that celebrate these imperialist holidays. So if you're going to celebrate them, birthdays, whatever it is, support organizations that are working to make the world a better place. So support our Forward Ever shop. Go to hoodcommunist.org. It's a revolutionary Pan-African blog. We have submissions that are entered there from all over the world. I'm a humble, regular contributor as well, and we encourage you to submit articles there and support Hood Communists, please. And then for those of you who are in the Sacramento area, February 1st, Saturday, we're having an event, 2025 in a Fascist Empire, a discussion on how those concerned in the African, quote-unquote, Black community should build and respond. And we want to invite all of you there. All of the information is on the screen. Be African to come. Just understand that we're going to be talking about it from an African point of view. But you're welcome. Everyone's welcome. But what we're going to be talking about is how do we create educational structures in our families, with our friends? How do we defend ourselves? How do we deflate conflict within our families and our communities? That's what we're going to be talking about. This is a solution-oriented thing. How do we get organized? So join us for that. Go to www.aprp-intl.org. Join the All African People's Revolutionary Party. You go to that site, that URL, you can see an orientation video, and you can be assigned to organizers closest to you, and we'll get you involved in the type of political education that had Shakura talking about the Cuban Revolution today. I felt like I was in church. So that's what we need. We need all of us to be able to do that. And not what's happening in Cuba? Well, I don't know. They said they communists. I mean, look, we can do so much better than that, you all. I mean, that we should be ashamed if that's the best we can do in 2024, 2025. And the only way we can do better is with that political education. So join us. And then the bottom right, we had an event yesterday where we had our sister Inem from Burkina Faso talking about the work that we're doing in the APRP there. So click on that QR code at the bottom right, and you can become a sponsor to Burkina Books. You can sponsor whatever you can each month, 5, 10, 20 US dollars. And it supports our efforts to bring revolutionary literature to the people on the ground in Burkina Faso, now Mali, now Niger, and soon all of Africa. And the Amazon, I forgot to check. I don't know if they're still on strike or not. But if they're on strike still, then do not buy my book, because that's the only way you can get it is through Amazon. Do not buy it if they're still on strike. If their strike has been resolved and it's a positive result, I have to check. I haven't had a chance to do that in my life over the last week or so. But if they're off strike, then buy the book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. A lot of what we're going to talk about at the event here on February 1st is designed around how can we build in our communities, primarily to support our Pan-African work on the ground in Africa. How do we do that living in Cleveland or California or Oregon or Texas? How do we do that? So that's what the book really gets in detail about. So encourage you to buy it. It's only $8 US, but don't buy it if the workers are still on strike. We don't cross picket lines. So we really appreciate you joining us. Hope you come back next week. Hope you join all of the APRP programs. Hope if you're African, you join the APRP. And if you don't join the APRP, you join some organization working for our people. And if you're not African, we hope that you join some organization working for justice. Enjoy the rest of your day. Forward ever, backwards never.